He has a read in he's ready to do. So we'll start with that.
Great. Now,
John, you're good with read in? E? Okay.
It is 4 o'clock. I know people are settling down. I did just want to announce, I don't know how much we had an issue with the live stream. It cut out for some reason. So now if anyone, I don't know who it affect because people are sitting here in this room, but it's now like a different live stream. Like it happened to cut out right as we took a break. So now if people are trying to find the live stream, it's not the live stream, file that it was on YouTube this morning. It's now a new live stream, but the one from this morning is still there. So just in case that's helpful for anyone to know. And if the panel's ready, or I should ask any administrative matters before we start.
Chairman, we do have one additional read-in. If we could proceed to have Mr. Griffin read into the record a response to read-in E.
Sure.
Okay, the question was whether MidCon, for the MidCon audit with revenue, the equipment, standby rates for equipment was an element of that audit, and the answer is no.
Thank you. That satisfies read in E. And is the panel ready for OCC to cross?
Yes, they are, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead, Attorney White.
Good afternoon. Let's see. Well, I guess the good news is that EOE was very thorough and they eliminated part of our cross. The bad news is you're still have to come back tomorrow. So I'm going to start with field resource coordinators. I heard that mentioned several times. So I'm going to be referring to OCC 535, but generally I'm just going to talk about or ask questions about field resource coordinators. So you're welcome to pull that up and let me know when you have it up, but I don't know if you need it. Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. So generally, I'm just trying to understand. OCC 535 said it could be an internal or vendor employee that's a field resource coordinator. So I'm kind of generally trying to understand how they work. So let me just start with is there a field resource coordinator assigned to each vendor crew, or I'm assuming that there are multiple per storm, but can we just see my question, start explaining?
Yes, they are assigned crews.
but generally, I mean, it sounds like you're asking a broader question. They're generally internal Eversource employees, but not always. There are some external field resource coordinators, but typically they're contractors that work for us on a fairly regular basis, and they know our systems and they know it because they're responsible for switching and tagging. But to your kind of more broad general question, they're responsible for multiple crews. And oftentimes it is kind of related to the size of the event and how much we have to force multiply. But typically, I would say on average, they're handling anywhere from 5 to 10 line crews each. And that translates into jobs or work locations. And even that changes again at where we are in the storm, whether it's the beginning of the storm or towards the end of the storm. But in general, they're managing 3 to 6 job locations as an average, and always exceptions, but if that's broad background for you.
Okay. Is it the same people every time, such that, as I've heard here today, you've stated that you use similar crews over and over again, from what I've understood. So would the field resource coordinators have some familiarity with the crews, or?
Yeah, good question. So typically the field resource coordinators are handling contractor crews. So our internal resources, which, clearly work every storm, are typically handled by internal supervisors. So if we're referring to a field resource coordinator, we're almost by definition referring to a contractor, and in this case, a contractor line crew for the most part. And I would say, that varies. We certainly have our base of local contractors that work most, if not all of our storms. And then they have affiliates that allow us to bring them in and they work many of our storms. But the larger you go up, the bigger the event, the farther we may have to go to bring in external resources. And even as Mark was describing, some of these kind of, for lack of a better word, storm chasers, they aggregate crews that could come from a variety of different locations, and they're often just pulling them from the union hall as long as they're a qualified line worker. So I would say there's not necessarily great knowledge from our field resource coordinators each and every time on the vendors that they are working with. But that's part of their responsibilities. We bring these contractors on board, that when they first meet each time in the morning, the field resource coordinator gives them a storm safety brief. So we start every day with a storm safety brief. They're walking through that with these crews. They're ensuring, how many resources do I have today? How many pieces of equipment do you have? The field resource coordinator is then taking that job assignment from the RMT, the resource management team. They're dispatching those crews to the job location, and then they are going out to those job locations. Oftentimes, they're the clearance holders that are taking the switching and tagging, ensuring that the crews are properly assessing the job, isolating the job, testing de-energized, grounding, and then going to work. And even once they get that crew to work, they're not done there. They're calling the RMT, getting, hey, what are my likely next jobs that you want me to go to? They're going to be scouting those in advance. They may or may not have to be going back to the area work center or the staging location to pick up additional materials to in some cases, prevent the crews from having to do that. And then again, they're following back up with the crews, making sure that they're working safely and dealing with any switching and clearing, switching and tagging that they have to take.
Thank you. And then do the field resource coordinators after the storm, do they have a role after that, or their role's basically done when the storm's finished?
Well, I guess I would just address first that day and just touch, not that I want to bring up the timesheets and invoices again, but I guess I just did. So, by definition, they're responsible for the crews for the entire day, which, as we've heard, often is a 16-hour day or a 16-plus-hour day. They don't all nicely end in 16-hour increments. The field resource coordinator is there that entire time. It's a very busy job. It's a very stressful job. So they are then acquiring those timesheets, but they're generally just reviewing them to make sure, again, as we've talked about several times, how many resources did I have today? How many pieces of equipment? What were the hours that they work? And they're basically just attesting to those hours, but that's the end of their day. And maybe I misunderstood your question. You were more referring to what do they do post-storm?
I think you might have touched on it basically there. Essentially, like once the storm is finished, they have packaged up that storm and sent it on for the review process, and they don't necessarily engage with that anymore. It sounded like what you were saying.
Yes, and I'd also say that we do post-storm reviews, right, with the field coordinators. Like, we'll ask them, how were the contractors? Were they productive? Did they conduct safety tailboards? Did they have good, proper PPE? Was their equipment in good working order? Was their equipment in good working order? Did they have any troubles getting them, making sure they were getting timely to their next assignment, not lagging between? So we try to do that in the post-review process to make sure that as we're hiring contractors, we weigh that in our decisions when going through the hiring process as well.
Thank you. Okay, so continuing with my follow-up questions here before I start the cross I had. I also heard you earlier, you talked about the review process, and I believe, if I heard it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you were explaining it as you load the information into Excel and kind of begin the process that way. When is the review generally performed?
Just to clarify, are you talking about as we hire crews?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, for the timesheets, for the invoices, timesheets. I think that was what
Yeah,
the question
I
was
can
about.
take this, Mark.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, so that is performed once the invoices are received. So the vendor will take the timesheets back to, their offices, and they will create an invoice using those and then submit the timesheets along with the invoices themselves to the company. And we will then take it from there. The first step in our approval process for the line crews in particular is what I described earlier, which is almost a full recreation of the invoice to ensure accuracy.
Okay. And final of the follow-up questions, there was a discussion regarding mobilization. I believe Chairman Will engaged in the discussion and Mr. Parent, where we were talking about mobilizing a crew coming from a location to Connecticut and then going, continuing on to it. And we were trying to understand that. And if I, once again, correct me if I misunderstood what I heard. As I understood it, as the crew mobilizes, the state that is receiving that crew is the one that pays for the mobilization. I'll stop there for a second.
Yes, that is true.
And then, so in the example you gave, or I believe maybe Chairman Will gave, there was Baton Rouge, Louisiana, came to Connecticut, and then from Connecticut to Massachusetts.
So the receiving state would then pay for the mobilization from Connecticut to Massachusetts.
Got you. Is there a demobilization between Connecticut and Massachusetts that Connecticut pays for?
No. So then Massachusetts would pay for the demobilization all the way back to Louisiana.
Got you. Okay. So now I'm completely changing topics, and I'm going to turn to Exhibit CLP-49 parentheses A. I'll give you a minute to pull that up for any frame of reference. That's event MS23F, I believe. And if it helps, I'm going to start you on page 2273 of that. So if someone could let me know. No, it's one of your original exhibits. It's all the support for a storm. It's exhibit CLP-49A, and it's the support for MS23F. CLP-49A, the A is in parentheses. It's all of your support for the event MS23F. Sizable PDF, 6,400 pages.
Sorry, Attorney White, I'm having the darndest time finding this. Can you tell me the number one more time?
It's exhibit CLP-49. It's in the it's in the dockets filings. I'm sorry, I believe it's in the, it is the support for one of the storms.
It's in the March 11th, 2024 overall application filing? Is that-
I think it's in one of the supplemental filings. I'm trying to pull it up here. I believe it's in one of the July. Yeah, it's the July 10th, 2025 filing. It's a pre-filed testimony, and then there's a lot of supplements, I believe.
Okay,
There's a PDF. Actually, that's not the right one. I could be wrong about that.
Chairman, one thing I could offer, if we just want to take a moment, is we do have an individual here on standby that could, if you want, we can have them try and bring it up on the monitor, if that would be helpful to the commissioners.
Well, I can bring up excerpted pages if I was presuming you wanted to see it on your screens as we were looking at this. Yeah. It's also, having sat in the cheap seats back there, really difficult to see on the monitors. Okay, this.
I think we're okay with it, without it being on the monitors, as long as the panel can see it. Thank you, though.
So we're good to proceed? Yes. Okay. And I realized we pulled it up there for a while, so I was going to begin on page 2273, if that helps you any. But, and I'm going to try to go slowly here because I'm going to jump around pages a little bit. If you could confirm when you're ready again, let me know.
All set.
All set, okay. Okay, so beginning on page 2273, I see invoices over the next few pages for flights that occurred on March 13th and March 17th. But then continuing on to pages 2306 and 2308, I only see the manifest for the returning flights on March 17th. One of the manifests is for 16 passengers and the other's for 30. I'm just trying to confirm, since I really don't have any way in the record, was it the same people flying in both directions on both flights?
So can you just give me those pages? The second page number was 2308, is that correct?
Yeah, the manifests are on 2306 and 2308. They're for the two return flights.
May we confer?
Certainly.
The answer is yes. Same 45 on both directions.
Thank you. We confirmed same 45 people came and left.
Okay. So now, I'm going to jump ahead some pages, but we're still working with these same people. It's just that it's not consolidated in that document. I'm going to the travel timesheet on page 2600, 2600. And on page 2605 and 2606, those are the travel timesheets for the folks on these flights.
Okay, we're there.
Okay. Some of the people, if you notice, there's more people on the timesheet than on the manifest. Some of the people listed on the timesheet were not on the manifest for the flight back that I can see, and you said it's the same people on both ends of the flight. But the timesheets, the original, the 2600, page 2600 timesheet says that they all came from Colorado. Did all of the people on this timesheet fly?
So there were two people were local to Connecticut.
And the remaining of them flew.
Correct.
Correct.
Who are the two local people to Connecticut?
They have different hours. I'd have to tell you. where it
Okay.
is.
Could we take a read in and just take some time to just get those two names for you?
Certainly.
Chairman, I have that as read in H. Does that sound correct?
Yes. That'd be read in H. And Attorney White, do you want to help me with the reference?
So we were looking at the, in the exhibit CLP 49A, page 2600. My question was that the names on the timesheet don't correspond with the manifest, and we're trying to determine who on the timesheet flew and who didn't.
So just to be clear, I know they were asked, two were local, and we'll identify who those two local individuals were. So we can provide that in response to read in H. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is, which of the two employees on the timesheet are local? Is that the,
Correct.
okay. Is that correct, Attorney White?
Yes, presuming the remainder of them flew. So I'm assuming we confirmed that in the response.
Okay. Actually, can we just have it, Attorney Pace says, can you please explain which of the employees on the timesheet were local and which flew? Then,
Yes, correct. Thank you.
Okay. So we're good? Okay. So I'm going to go to the invoice on page 2296.
We're there.
Okay. So it shows bus travel for 16 people to the airport at 3 p.m. on March 16th. But we were just discussing the manifest on the 2306 and 2308 that showed travel on March 17th. Both of those were flights leaving at 8 a.m. So I'm just trying to understand why we had bus travel on March 16th for 16 people.
Subject to further confirmation, I believe it could be back to their hotel.
Um, well, I think if you look on page 2298 in the comments, it tells you exactly where they went to and from. And I don't believe that's their hotel.
Sorry, what was the reference?
2298 is the last page of that same invoice receipt. Last thing, and then it says comments, tells you that they were picked up at 45 or in Beacon Falls, and they were dropped off at what I believe is is the airport. That made sense. So that's my question.
Yes. Is part of the question why we've flown all these crews in, or?
Nope. My question is, I have an invoice here that shows that they traveled to the airport on March 16th at 3 p.m. And I'm just trying to, make that correspond with the flight information I have, which was 2 flights leaving on March 17th at 8 a.m.
But I believe that to the earlier comment, there's hotels in that general area. So if they traveled by bus on the 16th and stayed overnight at the hotel and then flew out on the 17th.
Okay, so then the other remaining crew, the remaining 30 people traveled the next morning? On the invoice before that, on page 2293. They seem to equally travel from the same Beacon Falls location to the same Windsor Locks location.
Yes, I know that's where their yard is, where they keep all of their line trucks. So I would assume that they would have dropped their equipment off there and then traveled from there to the airport. Now, some may have stayed at the hotel, or some may have driven directly to the airport, or gotten a bus to the airport or shuttle.
On different days? For flights that left at the same time the next morning?
Well, if it's at 6 a.m., yeah, then some may not have bedded down at the hotel is what I'm trying to get. Yeah, I think like some did not, some bedded down, some did not bed down. Some either stayed at Beacon Falls and then traveled, whether they slept in their trucks or the night shift. I don't know what time they ended their work shift to then travel to.
Okay. So if the flights were on, it sounds like the flights were on March 17th, it appears. So I'm looking at the timesheet on page 2605. And it's showing 16 hours of travel to Beacon Falls, Connecticut. Can you explain that? It gives me a in location, not a from location.
And peace on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think offered to do sometimes fly crews in, have trucks. But you've already read that testimony, and there's no questions associated with that. In order to tick and tie each individual. Have to go back and try and tick and tie. Travel back and forth from Colorado.
And our preference would be for a late file exhibit if we can, and because we have some very detailed questions about the specific individuals that were flown in to support the restoration effort. And therefore, if Attorney White, if you've listed your specific questions, we can provide those responses into one consolidated late file exhibit. If that works for the chairman, it also works for OCC.
If we can add, if we were adding on to the previous late file exhibit, this is a little bit different. Well, it is still the same folks, but what I'm trying to understand in this particular question is why I have 16 hours of travel on March 16th when the next page of the invoices is 2606, and I equally have travel on March 17th, roughly, that day it seems to have different travels anywhere between 12, 14, 11, 13, all in that range of travel. March 17th was the flight. That made sense to me. March 16th is not the flight. So I'm trying to understand when we have 16 hours of travel in a day that isn't the flight.
Okay, so we'd be happy to respond to that in a late file. And Chairman, I think with your permission, that would be late file 10. And we could respond to Attorney White's questions regarding those specific pages and the personnel that were brought in to support the restoration effort. And she had a question about March 16th.
Right. Explain the 16 hours of travel time on March 16th.
Sure. So I have late file 10 as reference exhibit CLP 49A, page 2605. Please explain why there were 16 hours of travel for March 16th when the flight appears to have taken off on March 17th. Does that capture
Correct.
your question?
Yes.
And then did you want to combine, because Attorney Pace, it sounded like the suggestion may have been to combine the last read-in question with that, which was the question about which employees flew and which were local with a reference to page 2600. Does it make sense to combine those into one late file?
I think that's a very good suggestion. So we'll take you up on the offer. So that would be, we cancel read in H, and we would provide that information Attorney White requested on the two local individuals. We'll provide that in the response of late file 10.
Okay. That work for you, Attorney White?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so I just combined, I won't make everyone suffer through me reading it again, but I combined what I had already read out for read in H to be the second part of late file 10.
Okay, are we good? Okay. Okay, so I'm still in the same general area. I believe, let me make sure this is correct. I'm on 2601. Unfortunately, that page appears to be sideways, so you might have to tilt your head a little bit. And it's still those same timesheets from that crew from Colorado that flew here. So if you let me know. Okay. So I noticed that some workers billed for 16 hours. Which is, once again, this is, you have to really zoom in on it to catch some of these things. Some workers billed for 16 hours, whereas other workers billed for 18 hours. But the start and the end time at the top is the same for everyone. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Are you referring to the billable hours where it's 16 and then on the other column, excuse me, where it's? Oh,
I'm referring,
18, yep, 18 and then, or are you just talking the labor hours, not the?
so I'm talking the work time. And if we go down to, let's see, in the middle of it, Paul, I'm sorry, this is really difficult. George Kane and Paul Nicodin Newton, I'm sorry. They have 18 hours, it looks like. The gentleman after that, Jake, has 18 hours. So, whereas the folks above him have 16, I believe. It just seems to me to have different hours. So I'm trying to square how the folks have different hours when it's the same time on top.
I mean, there's a couple, I mean, I can give a couple of reasons. I'm seeing that, general foremen are billing at 18 hours. Some general foremen are billing at 18 hours, and they typically have to do the paperwork of the crews when they get in. And check in all of the crews and make sure they all. Some of the others are apprentices, and I mean, not all of these crews would have been assigned the same job. So they could have finished at different times. They wouldn't necessarily have to finish all at the same time. So it's not uncommon where we see some crews. Typically, they work a 16-hour day. But then there's crews that are lagging behind by a couple hours. There's basically an extra hour or two on a general foreman's timesheet because he's waiting. And that's, off of this cover sheet. You would see 16 hours difference between some and the other. They don't all travel together.
And 18 exceeds the start time and the end time, though, on the timesheet. So that's acceptable? The start time and the end time don't need to agree with the total time on the timesheet?
I would say that's what they probably thought the majority of the crews were going to work for their standard shift. And some went over by 2. So it's whether you pick the 10 PM or you extend it and put /12, I guess.
Okay.
Don't account for the other 2 hours.
Okay.
I just want to break in to make sure you put your mic on. Look at pickup, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look at another timesheet here. Same document, page 2478. Okay, thank you. So in this one, so one of my questions is that, so the crew billed for 16 hours of work on this timesheet, states at the top, they work from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. But when we look at the time in the boxes on in boxes 24 and 25, they don't start their event time until 10:30 a.m. So what occurred between 6 a.m. and 10:30 a.m.?
They could have been dispatched out but not received. This looks like the top one is a ticket that they would have been given so that they didn't start receiving work till 10:30 in the morning.
So when you say dispatched out but didn't receive work, did they explain to me what that means?
So if they started at
To get material.
Yeah, so at 8 a.m. they started, they had to go get materials, so they probably traveled at 8 a.m. from their hotel, picked up a box lunch or picked up something at the hotel for their day, left, went to the area work center. It says here they had to pick up materials. And then once they got the materials from the stock room, they would leave. That took 2.5 hours basically before they left to start going to do the work.
Are you on page 2478?
2478, where it says en route with pole and material to help.
Yep.
So that-
Where are you seeing pick up the materials? I
Well, they wouldn't have a pole with them or any of that material, so they would have had to travel from wherever they woke up at to an area work center. They would have had to loaded a pole dinky, loaded a pole, loaded cross arms, potentially transformer. I mean, it's very reasonable that it would take them 2.5 hours to do all of that and then start traveling to the work trip. So
4.5 hours.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
again, just as we talked about before, that's not the primary focus at this point in time, right? The state has been devastated. We're trying to get the communities back up and running, the state back up and running, the customers' lights back on. These crews, we're trying to get them as efficiently as they can to the job locations. We are not asking them to parse out on their timesheets the time that they were at the safety briefing, the time that they traveled to their first work location, the time that they traveled to pick up material, the time that they took to assess the job site, the time that they took to isolate devices, the time that they took to take switching and tagging, the time that they took to actually make the repairs, the time that they took to then patrol further down the line, the time that they took to remove their grounds, the time that they took to switch back in and energize the customers. We are trying to capture what time did you start, how many people are there, how many pieces of equipment do you have, what time did you leave your job, what time did you get back? And the jobs don't all come in perfect 16-hour increments. So there's pluses and minuses on each end of those. And then we have an Eversource person or a dedicated contractor that's signing off. That's who I had with me for that entire day. And I kept them efficiently working for the entire day. That's what we're trying to capture. You're never going to be able to go through these timesheets and pick off when did you leave to go pick up a pole and what time did you get back? It's just not going to be on there.
Understand.
Mr. Sullivan, can I just jump in and just comment? I appreciate I appreciate and understand that, and I've heard you make similar comments throughout the proceeding. I just want to add context that, as I'm sure you understand, we as regulators have an entire state of people who constantly say, who's auditing this stuff? Who's looking at this? And I appreciate the frustration. I've seen it in the filings. From my perspective, that's what's happening. You've got someone auditing you, asking questions these are the questions that are expected of ratepayers. Ratepayers expect of the regulatory environment to be asking. So again, you can feel free to continue the comments, and it is helpful context. I'm not suggesting that it's not helpful for us to remember, but I just wanted to throw in that, what we're doing here is looking at details because that's what we're here for. Like what else would we be doing in this room other than looking at details?
Yep, 100% understand that. I'm just trying to point out some level of these details you're never going to tick and tie, and it would cost a lot more to try and parse that out on a timesheet.
I want to make sure.
Go right ahead. Sorry.
So I'll tell you what, rather than continuing on this line of thought, in OCC 447, we were trying to get a breakdown of the work done by this particular vendor. Every question I've asked her so far has been about one vendor. And you essentially told us to do it ourselves. And as we can see through the questions here, it's not in the timesheets for us to be able to do ourselves. So I'm going to try an LFE again with what I asked for in 447. So, and it's going to be a bit of a complicated LFE, so I'm warning you in advance, Chairman Will.
Right. I've got my spreadsheet pulled up.
Okay. So in the form of an unlocked Excel spreadsheet, and our vendor is Midcon, I would like a list of each of their employees that worked on just this one storm, MS-23F, relatively small storm. I would like their home office location, their starting location, how they traveled to get to here, Connecticut, and then the time and dates attributed to their categories of work. And I'm calling categories of work travel, standby, work. That seems to be what the buckets are in our in the timesheets. And finally, cites to the relevant invoices, documents, whatever in the substantiation that shows me that info.
All right, here's how far I got before you're gonna have to. I got, please provide an unlocked Excel spreadsheet for MidCon's MS-23F travel costs, including home office location, starting location, mode of travel. That's where I lost you.
Okay. The time and dates attributed to their categories of work. So the categories of work that I know of are travel, standby, and work. Or the categories of build time, I guess we'll call it, rather than work, because work's one of the subcategories. And then just the sites in the record that show me where you're getting that information.
All right, and I'll ask Attorney Pace, subject to the discussions we've had many times about, capacity to provide information in the timeline. Is that an acceptable late file?
Yeah, so it's clear what Attorney White is looking for, and we'll endeavor to do our best to provide the information we can. And if we're not able to locate something, we'll give an explanation and we'll produce a witness at the late file hearing to respond to follow-up questions. So we're happy to do that.
Thank you. That'll be late file 11.
Thank you. Okay to proceed?
Yes.
Is everyone? Okay. So do you know how many storm fleet vehicles you deployed for the event MS-23F? And I will cue you. I'm asking because EOE 961 shows the cost, but not the number of vehicles. And so I couldn't really piece that back together.
And so just to confirm, you referenced OCC 961?
EOE 961.
961, thank you,
Mhm.
Attorney White.
Actually, I'll tell you what, rather than a read-in, maybe it's easier if we just do, could we get an LFE just showing the number of storm fleet vehicles deployed for each storm? That might be easier, if that's acceptable.
All right.
Right, I was for each storm. That way we could figure, and we don't want to read in for each storm.
Would that still be a reference to EOE 961? I hadn't gotten there yet.
It doesn't,
Okay.
you don't need 961. It's the cost and not number of vehicles, so it's
Okay. So that'll be late file 12. Please provide the number of storm fleet vehicles deployed for each storm.
please. Yes. Yeah, as I said, I believe EOE 961 tells me the cost, but it doesn't tell me the number of vehicles with each one. Okay, if you let me know when you're ready. Okay. Okay. So earlier today, I heard some discussion about the order number 8 in the docket 200803 that required a minimum amount of information on the contractor timesheets. But before that order in that docket, did the company require a minimum amount of information to be included on the timesheets?
So the answer is yes. I was just making sure that we could go back to pre-Isaias if you needed a example of a contracted timesheet.
So let me make sure I understand. When you say an example of a contractor timesheet, I think I definitely see pre-SIS timesheets in the record. My question was, did you require that the contractor input a minimum amount of info? Like, if it didn't, was it required to, I know the boxes, I know the fields on the timesheet, and we've been through this multiple times today about how they're not all filled out entirely. Were prior to that order in that docket, did you require them to input that information on that timesheet?
I would say not to perfect to the level that we have, not even to the level that we have today, because we have more boxes, we have more fields that we have to fill in now. But we provided the boxes that we provided, if they had that information, we would ask that they fill that in.
And if it wasn't filled in, did you reject the timesheet?
Only if we weren't able to come up with the established time that they worked, started work, number of trucks, number of equipment, number of employees to accurately depict what their invoice was, totaling. So if the timesheets, the equipment, the rates didn't match what we had on file, then we would have rejected the invoice.
Okay.
So it's all through the invoicing review process, not necessarily the timesheet. The timesheet is critically important, but just as important to the timesheet is that the fact that if they work 16 hours, that the rate that they charged us on the invoice matched what we had on our rate sheet via the contract.
I would say we've always had what we need for cost controls. And while the fields and the timesheets have changed, the invoices have always been reviewed through a chain of authority and collaborated using additional records such as, crew rosters and hiring documents. So while the timesheets changed, everything has always been there that we require to ensure we have proper cost controls.
For instance, we have hiring emails, we have other pieces of information that don't exist on a timesheet to help us calculate and verify the accuracy of the invoice. So we don't just rely on one piece of information. We rely on the totality of the process, from when we send the hiring email to when they acknowledge it, to when they've started traveling, to calculating the travel time, to utilizing the timesheet, and then when the invoice is received, verifying that all of the rates and times match what the invoice dollar value is.
And for the times on the timesheets, in this time frame, the field resource coordinator was equally, you still had a field resource coordinator back then. That was still the person that was responsible for knowing what was occurring in the field.
Yes, and I would say over the course of the past 8 years, we have developed further trainings, continued to educate our workforce to find errors that may have been made that caused us to reject invoices, and then try to educate our workforce, the field coordinators, on make sure that you pay attention to these fields. We're seeing some errors in invoices that didn't match. So those type of things have happened throughout the course of the years and through the revisions of the timesheets.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand something you said there. You were talking about invoices rather than timesheets. Are the field resource coordinators are reviewing the invoices?
Just the timesheet.
Just the timesheets. Okay, so
Sorry.
we're using those terms interchangeably.
Yes.
I just want to make sure I
But
understood.
I guess what I was trying to illustrate is that one leads to the other. So how we hire the crews, how we track the crews on the front end, to how we track them and oversee them during the event, to then how we collect all that information and then verify that off of our contracts, is how we accurately make sure that we're paying the correct invoice.
Understood.
So just to confirm that, so I just want to make it clear, we've always had some form of a timesheet,
Timesheet.
right? It may have looked different, but we've always had those core requirements that we need, in order to take the timesheet, validate the invoice. So the formats may have changed, but we've always had that. So I just want to make that clear.
So when you say core requirements on a timesheet, what are the core requirements on a timesheet?
So we always need to know, who's working, their hours worked, the day, the job classification, the rates, the equipment that they have.
Types of equipment, certainly classification is very important.
Attorney White, I'm just noting the time. We got 4 minutes for our 5 o'clock. Just throwing it out there.
And I was going to jump in. Sorry. So you mentioned a couple minutes ago, you sometimes come across irregularities, where you have to resolve something, right? Or something doesn't add up.
So some of that could have been misuse of terminology on a timesheet. If they had extra pieces of equipment on a timesheet that we didn't know about, and checking to verify, were they authorized to bring a backyard machine? Were they authorized to bring special pieces of equipment? If they did, we could verify that up front. If we didn't, we would then clarify with the contractor right up front that, I'm sorry, we hired you, but we didn't hire 4 pole dinkies and 2 backyard machines. So we've noted that, we've reported that back. So when you invoice us, we're not going to authorize we're not going to authorize the payment of this extra equipment. Things like that we've approved upon because we saw, again, you're doing an invoice months later. This piece of equipment's here. Now we're trying to rectify. It's better if you can catch it right away, I guess is
Yeah.
my.
That was going to be my next question, is whether you saw, you learn from those and it signals to you that maybe you need to revise a practice.
And those are the coaching points and the talking points that we try to go back to the field coordinators with and say, make sure you're checking that, if they had 6 pickup trucks on this piece of an invoice where you're supposed to have, in certain instances, 2 people per vehicle instead of 6 pickup trucks for 6 people, that's a red flag. These are the red flags that you should be, trying to identify, catch early, let us correct it, let us reach out to the contractor the day of the event, during the event, not post-event when we're trying to now reconcile invoices.
Thanks.
I believe I heard we're done for the day, so.
Unless we got, let's just call it. We'll start again tomorrow. We'll resume with cross for OCC and we will break until tomorrow. Is there a 1-minute administrative matter we can handle?
The only question we have for them is they booked 5 hours for cross-examination. Do they have a sense in terms of how much they plan to do tomorrow, if they're able to communicate that?
I will ask OCC to respond to that, knowing full well that having sat in that seat, it's impossible to answer that question, but feel free to try.
So as we conveyed to the case coordinator, we were really hoping our 5 hours was an overestimation. It took us an hour to do this right here. 3? We're going to go with 3 and see how close we come.
Thank you.
Like
Thank you
a
very
pool.
much.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah.